Charles Manson. The name alone conjures images of chaos, violence, and mindless obedience. A charismatic madman who commanded a family of devoted followers to commit a series of heinous, ritualistic murders that shattered the idyllic dream of the 1960s. That's the story we know. That's the narrative that has been etched into our collective consciousness for decades. But what if everything you thought you knew about him was only part of the story? What if Charles Manson wasn't just a cult leader, but a product of something far more sinister? What if the Manson family wasn't a spontaneous gathering of drugged-out hippies, but a carefully engineered psychological operation? What if the crimes weren't the result of some divine madness or satanic ritual, but the chilling finale of a government-funded mind control experiment? Buried beneath layers of sensational headlines, distorted media portrayals, and courtroom transcripts lies a disturbing theory. One that links Charles Manson not to the devil or some cosmic evil, but to a very real, very secret government program. A program so dark, so unethical, and so far-reaching that its true scope may never be fully known. The Ghosts of MKUltra. The program was called MKUltra. Launched in the 1950s by the CIA, its official purpose was to explore the boundaries of human consciousness. Its real mission was far more terrifying: to develop techniques for mind control, psychological manipulation, and the chemical reprogramming of the human brain. The CIA was obsessed with finding a way to create a Manchurian candidata, sleeper agent who could be activated to perform tasks, including assassinations, without conscious knowledge or memory. On paper, the project was officially terminated in 1973 after the Watergate scandal exposed some of its darker secrets. But in reality, its ghosts and shadows never left. The techniques and the research simply went underground, into black projects and private institutions, away from the prying eyes of Congress and the public. Now, imagine a young drifter during this era. In and out of prison since his teenage years, no family, no roots, sociopath with a troubled past. A man who is essentially a blank slate, disconnected from society and ripe for manipulation. Charles Manson fit the profile perfectly. He was the ideal candidate, the disposable subject for an experiment that had no moral limits. Between 1955 and 1967, Manson was arrested multiple times for everything from car theft to pimping to forgery. But despite a long list of parole violations and prior convictions, he was repeatedly released. The justice system seemed to have an unusual leniency towards him. He should have been locked away for good. But he wasn't. He was given parole, a bus ticket, and sent back into the world. Why? The question is not why he was arrested, but why he was consistently protected. Why was he allowed to stay free, to wander the country, and to eventually find his way to the epicenter of the counterculture movement? The doctor, the clinic, and the cult. The answer might be found in a place where the hippie movement was at its peak: the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco. This was the hub of the Summer of Love, and a place Manson frequented. It was here that he began to gather his family. But Haight-Ashbury was not just a haven for peace and love. It also happened to be a known hub for MKUltra activity, particularly at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. The clinic's director is Dr. Louis Jolien Weston, infamous psychiatrist with documented ties to the CIA's mind control experiments. West was a controversial and deeply unsettling figure in the psychiatric community. He was the man who once killed an elephant named Tusco with a massive dose of LSD in an unscientific and barbaric experiment. He also treated Jack Ruby, the man who killed Lee Harvey Oswald, and famously declared Ruby to be insane. And yet no one ever talks about his connections to Charles Manson, a man who frequented a clinic West ran, and who was gathering a cult in the very same city. Or is this just a coincidence? Or is it a thread in a much larger tapestry? Manson's girls young, impressionable, often runaway teens, were systematically broken down and rebuilt. Their identities were erased. Their wills were replaced with his, or someone's. They were subjected to a constant barrage of psychological abuse, sleep deprivation, and extreme drug use. Their vulnerability was exploited and weaponized. This wasn't just cult programming. It was a textbook case of traumatic conditioning. It was the practical application of MKUltra's most terrifying findings, implemented not in a lab, but in a real-world setting. But was Manson truly the mastermind? or merely the face of something deeper? Look closely at his behavior, his terrifying charisma, his absolute command over his followers. He could break people with a look, speak in riddles that his followers found profound, control minds with a rhythmic repetition of phrases. Was this a natural talent, a sociopathic genius? Or was it a set of skills he was taught, a toolkit of psychological manipulation provided by those who were studying his every move? Manson and his family had access to a steady supply of high-purity drugs, LSD, meth, and scopolamine. These weren't just common street drugs. They were military-grade, experimental substances. Who was providing them and why? The Manson family was an expensive, demanding operation, and the money to sustain it was not coming from panhandling. This was a well-funded, well-supplied test group. The murders in the aftermath. His parole officer, Roger Smith, rarely cracked down on Manson despite knowing he violated parole dozens of times. He was a parole officer who seemed more interested in protecting Manson than in punishing him. Why was Manson protected? The answer becomes clearer when you consider the possible endgame. The Manson family wasn't just a hippie cult. It was a carefully controlled psychological operation. A test group for human obedience, violence, and the effects of altered perception. The killings, brutal, ritualistic, and seemingly random, shocked the nation. But they also served a very specific purpose. They ended the counterculture movement almost overnight. The age of love and peace dissolved in a pool of blood. The hippie dream died, replaced by a fear that haunted a generation. And who benefited the government? The CIA. The same institutions that were desperate to dismantle a growing youth movement that rejected war, control, and conformity. A movement that questioned authority and threatened the established order. In the wake of the Manson murders, surveillance laws tightened. Protests lost momentum. The FBI expanded its notorious COINTELPRO operations. The message was clear, and it was brutal. Question the system, and madness follows. Don't trust your neighbor, because he might be a madman? Stay in line. And yet no one ever asked why Manson was free for so long, why he knew so much about manipulation and mind control, why he said so little during his trial, almost as if he was following orders to remain silent. Years later, documents would confirm the CIA's long history of mind control, drug experimentation, and manipulation of vulnerable individuals. M-culture was real, and its fingerprints were everywhere. But the Manson case, still untouchable, still wrapped in mystery and contradiction. It's too convenient, too perfect, and too terrifying to be just a simple crime. Even during his trial, Manson seemed to perform. He carved an X into his forehead. He called himself the devil. But maybe the true demons were sitting in a secure office building in Langley, Virginia, watching their most successful experiment unfold on national television. What if Charles Manson never stopped being a subject? What if the murders were just the final phase of the experiment? An experiment designed to prove a terrifying truth, that with the right drugs, the right trauma, and the right conditioning, anyone can become a killer. Anyone can become an agent of chaos. If true, Manson wasn't the anomaly. He was the blueprint. A disposable asset in a hidden war. Pawn on a board too vast to see. So next time you hear his name, don't think madman. Think test subject. And ask yourself how many others were out there. How many other lost souls were given a push, a drug, or a command? Because if Charles Manson was made, who's being made now? How will we know? The real horror of the Manson story isn't in the murders, but in the possibility that the man who committed them was never in control at all.